Welcome into the Take the North podcast presented by Odyssey. I am Dan Wiederer, joined today by a very special guest. It is Dave Birkett of the Detroit Free Press with a lot of ground to cover as we both walk into wild card round. Dave, this is a familiar territory that I'm in for the both of us in the middle of a wide-ranging coaching search here in Week 19. Very unfamiliar territory for both of us where you are. Wild card weekend, first round bye in the NFC playoffs, awaiting to see who the Detroit Lions will play in the divisional round. How you doing?
Yeah, man, I'm great. And, it's good to have a bye week and not have to worry about some of the off-field stuff that you're dealing with now. Because I lived that life for a long, long time here in Detroit. That's for sure.
Yeah. And maybe that makes you very, very, very insightful as a guest to try to help offer Chicago a plan out of the darkness and into whatever world you're living right now, which feels like a parade. The name of this podcast is Take the North because 3 years ago, Ryan Poles promised Chicago that the Bears were going to take the North and never give it back. The Lions took the North for the first time in 2023, and now it seems like they're not going to give it back. You think they're ever going to give it back?
Man, I mean, look, obviously these things go in cycles, but the Lions are built to last. They've done a really good job. Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell. I know we've talked about sort of how they've built this thing in the past, but starting from 2021 when they took over, going through the draft. The amount of talent that they've added, the way they've kept their coaching staff intact, is something that doesn't happen in the NFL. Their coordinators are Ben Johnson was part of that staff, wasn't the coordinator to start, but both the coordinators, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, have been here for 3+ years. They have some really enviable continuity. Guys around the league want to play for them, which is something that hasn't always been the case. And look, what goes around comes around, I guess. And so maybe it's not always going to be this way, but I do think the Lions have a long runway here of being good.
Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn will be the bulk of our conversation here in a minute, but I did want to revisit with you Sunday night because that felt like a moment in Detroit. And even just watching that from a hotel room in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, I was struck by, one, the environment, two, the way that the Lions met that moment, right? Like, I think there's been some questions with the way their defense has been hit by injuries on whether they would be able to kind of respond, and every challenge they take, they seem to respond. And that one felt like not only a passing grade and a huge moment, but an A+.
There's no doubt. And, look, they've, under Dan Campbell, at least since 2022, when they sort of turned the corner a little bit, I think they're 11-1 now in primetime games. So, and the one loss was to the Dallas Cowboys in the game 2023 when the 2-point conversion was nullified when it should have been allowed with about 20 seconds left. So, they have a history of doing this and coming up big in the big moments. And certainly that's a credit to the coaching staff. And, you mentioned the defense and kind of the way that they played. Look, this is, everyone sort of knows the story in general, but, they still played that game without 5 defensive starters from earlier in the season. And what they did against a really good offense. And I have my doubts about what Sam Darnold really is, but he's played really well this year, and the Vikings have a really good coach and one of the best receiving cores around. And what the Lions did to shut that thing down and really, limit them in the red zone and walk away with a resounding victory, can't be overstated. I think Aaron Glenn did a heck of a job in that game.
Yeah, and you say they're missing 5 starters. These aren't just 5 pieces. This is Aiden Hutchinson. This is Aleem McNeil. These are guys that are like engines of that defense that have been missing, and they obviously have found answers and shown the depth and sort of the resilience, I guess, to make things work.
And most teams, you can't do that or don't do that. And look, every team has injuries, so every team is overcoming something. But from the Lions' standpoint, they lost their best pass rusher, their best defensive end, Aiden Hutchinson, their best interior defensive lineman in Aleem McNeil. Their best cornerback in Carlton Davis, their other starting edge, defender in Marcus Davenport. And it's not, just about coaching and, some of the guys that they've had step up are, equal to some of the guys they lost. Josh Paschal playing defensive end, taking over from Marcus Davenport, for instance, right? That's a trade-off. But the depth issues that they've dealt with this year, that they've been able to overcome with different game plans and different ways to attack different teams, I think it does. It just speaks really highly of the coaching staff and, what Dan Campbell has sort of put together here over the past 4 seasons.
Before we cross the bridge to the coaching candidates that are on the Bears' radar, just describe for me the environment Sunday at Ford Field, and then also just the vibe in Detroit, given that this season has been pretty much a dream run.
Look, you've seen it when Lions have come to Chicago the last couple of years. The amount of Lions fans that sort of go on the road and what this means to fans of this organization. Obviously 1957, the last time they won a championship here in Detroit, and I can't tell you just how excited this fan base is and the way that it permeates throughout the city. I mean, road games have been amazing. Home games are even better in terms of the amount of Lions fans and the volume that they produce. And, there was a key play where they, the Vikings first half, they down near the goal line, second and goal at the 2, if I'm not mistaken. And you get a false start and all of a sudden, and that's probably due to the noise and the environment and everything that was there. And so that, you sort of talk about, hey, fans can impact the game. We've seen it here in Detroit. It really happens. Ford Field, that's why I think the Lions are going to win the NFC championship and advance to the Super Bowl, because I don't see them losing at home. Had they lost that game to the Vikings, I know they've lost at home this year, but had they lost that game, had they gone on the road, I don't know if they could have won 3 straight on the road. At home, I just don't think anyone beats them, because this place is a really tough place to play right now.
It's incredible to talk about, given some of the places that we've been over our collective time covering the division, that this team does look like it's capable of playing on the last Sunday of the season and being the one that takes the trophy during that ceremony. One of the reasons they're here is because their offensive coordinator has found a groove, and really this season and for the last 2 seasons has shown the rest of the league what he's capable of. Ben Johnson is probably the hottest name in the coaching cycle this offseason. Certainly a guy that Chicago Bears fans are eager to learn more about, with the possibility of him potentially coming in to take this job, to unite with a young quarterback like Caleb Williams. When you look at Ben's coaching candidacy and you start with the strengths column of what he has brought to Detroit, where do you start? What are the things that you tell people about that has made him and this offense so special?
Well, creative is usually the first word I go to. I mean, because of what he does offensively, and his philosophy is, he said this many times, is he wants to make the same plays look different and different plays look the same. They operate out of a maybe a small amount of personnel packages or looks, but then they do so many a wide variety of things out of there. The trick plays, you saw those firsthand, right, in both games. The trick plays that he comes up with, he and his staff. The willingness of him, head coach too, but him to call these in really any situation, and the depth that they can go to pull some of these plays out. I mean, I think that's the thing that you go to first and foremost. But the other thing, and I think why the Bears with Caleb Williams and some of these other teams that have young quarterbacks, the New England Patriots with Drake May, are especially interested because of what he's done with Jared Goff. And I mean, it's easy to forget now because Goff is an MVP candidate, and but what he was when the Rams sort of gave up on him, and why they gave up on him, the turnovers he had, maybe the lack of confidence that he was playing with. And even early in his time here in Detroit, the first half of a season when Anthony Lynn was the coordinator, Jared Goff didn't look like he was going to be this type of quarterback that could lead them to the NFC Championship. But Ben has empowered Jared, and he's really believed in Jared, and he and Dan and sort of that unison. And I think that's as big a reason why any is Jared has come back around and reached his potential and is playing as well as he has. So you start with the creativity on offense, and he wants to continue calling plays as a head quarter. You look at what he's done with the quarterback, and I think he would be a great get for any team that has a young quarterback.
I'm going to circle back to that creativity in a minute, but you and I talked for a couple off seasons after Jared Goff arrived in Detroit about how he was probably just a bridge, and that the Lions were going to be scouring the draft to try to find somebody to come in. And now you walk into Ford Field and people are chanting Jared Goff every time that the Lions are in the field. I don't think it can be understated how transformational his career has been, I guess, with the emergence he's had. And I guess how much of Ben's fingerprints do you think are on that? Obviously, Jared deserves a lot of credit, but it feels like the union between the coordinator and then the head coach also having that jolt of self-confidence that he gave Jared Goff. How do you sort of attribute the rise that has been Jared Goff over the last couple of
years? And look, I'll raise my hand and be the first to say, I was wrong about Jared and what I thought he was going to be here in Detroit. And I know there's some people in the organization that maybe I was taking my lead from on that doubted maybe what he could be too, or weren't quite convinced he could be this. But look, it starts with Jared. Give him the bulk of the credit because he's the guy doing it on the field. And I think if I had to rank him, I think Dan in the confidence that he's instilled in Jared. Jared has talked about it before that, midway through that first season, he was not playing good football, and he thought maybe he would be benched at a point in time. But Dan was just honest with him and like, hey, this is what you got to do better, and we still believe in you, and I'm not going away from you. And I think the trust and the faith that Dan put in him really has helped him get here. But Ben is a part of that too. I mean, again, like Jared and Anthony Lynn didn't see eye to eye on sort of what was going on with the offense at the time, and maybe Jared didn't feel quite as empowered as he does now by the Lions' first coordinator. Ben took over as passing game coordinator that first season. You saw an immediate difference in his play, and I think in what the offense did. And even though the record didn't turn around right away, there was a little something different about Jared going into the next year. And once he cut back on the turnovers, that I think just infused him with even more confidence. And part of why he did that was because of, Ben and sort of what he does with the offense and the way he makes it easy to digest and some of the route combinations and different things that he does to get guys open. So, all three of those have had a part in his resurgence. I wouldn't take anything away from him, but I don't know that he would be here without Ben Johnson too.
The other guy that I've just become absolutely mesmerized with is Jahmyr Gibbs. And look, like there are guys, in this division where you go see them twice a year and you can't wait to watch them, right? Like for me, for a decade, it was Devontae Adams. It was just like that dude was putting on art every time you watched him run routes and torch the Bears. Jahmyr Gibbs is becoming that guy, obviously coming off a 4-touchdown effort in the finale on Sunday. Certainly controversial, maybe too strong of a word, but questionable when they drafted him a couple of years ago. I'm just curious what the vision was, how much Ben was involved in that, if at all, and just what they've been able to use him as a chess piece that has clearly taken this offense to new heights as well.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you on like what say he had in the drafting of Gibbs. I guess I'd lean towards, that being a Brad Holmes,
Sure.
Dan Campbell decision, since I know they both had, a big say, but, they're not. Look, Ben was all in on it too. You can say that. And the vision that he has very much aligns with Dan Campbell. And that's, as creative and as open as this offense is. I mean, they're a run first team, and they, part of why things work so well is because they are so good in the play action game, because they run the ball so well. And Jahmyr is just that, he is that type of weapon that he can break it at any time he touches. I mean, Dan, I've said this before, like when he takes a handoff, he looks like he's going 100 miles an hour already. Like he hits full speed so fast. And so some of the things that he can do to gain yards before contact, to get himself, into one-on-one matchups sort of on that second level, and he's running behind a really good offensive line. But what he does to make things easy on himself, I guess, is a big part of, the success he's had. I think personally, that the Lions have a little bit of a decision to make too when David Montgomery comes back here for the playoffs. I mean, they're not going away from the two-back, offense that they use, but they're a better team when Jahmyr Gibbs is on the field. And so I don't know how many carries you want to take away from him in these win or go home situations.
You also understand why David Montgomery's rushing to get back as he sees what Jahmyr Gibbs is doing without him out. Look, like the explosiveness is fun to watch. I put it in the capsule I wrote about Ben Johnson that they scored 68 touchdowns during the regular season. The Bears had 33 offensive touchdowns. So you do the contrast and you go, this is a totally different world that the Lions are living in. The trickery and the creativity makes it fun. That's clear. And obviously Bears fans in this audience saw it firsthand in week 16 with Stumble Bum. Tell this group right here one or two fun things you learned about Stumble Bum when you were kind of breaking that down after that game where they used, basically I think one of somebody said in our market, and I parroted it, that looked like the Lions are so good they have to fake their mistakes and their fall downs to get something done.
Yeah, I called it the Stumble Rooski before we knew what the actual name was. Like it was, and so that one itself was one of his lower level assistants, or two of them, I guess, that sort of came up with it. And a lot of what happens here's the backstory on a lot of these things, right? Is that Ben has talked about this before. Like he's got a stack of index cards like on his desk. Chris Spielman finds plays in college games, random college games that he stumbles across, and some of the the assistant position coaches on offense are sort of tasked with that, like coming up with some of these really creative things. He's even got, He's even had a play handed to him by an official in, during one of their training camp practices 2 years ago that he swears he's going to get to at some point. So there are no boundaries on the links that he and his staff will go to find some of these creative plays and try to put them in use. And the thing I think that is extremely important about not just that play, but all these plays is the level of detail and precision that it takes to execute some of these. And those are, that's what I think sets Ben apart from some of the other, from some of his other peers, is when the Lions drill these things, like, the splits, players in the locker room have talked about this, the exact positioning of where this receiver needs to be on the field, and the detail of how Jahmyr Gibbs is going to fall on the stumble bump play, or where Jared has to have his hands when he's faking that he's losing that fumble. Those things are all, the players are dialed into it because Ben is so precise about that when he installs it. And so I think, a lot of coaches talk about that, and I think a lot of teams preach that, but there are very few that maybe live it to the degree that the Lions do. And that's a big part of why this offense is so successful too. And again, it goes back to his philosophy of making every play, making the same plays look different and the different plays look the same, right? If you're running the exact same thing with the exact same receiver split, the same motion, but then you do something different to get, Penei Sewell on an end around, halfback, your, offensive lineman toss play, like all of a sudden you've got the defense pulling its hair out, like what's going on.
Yeah, just so you know, the 6th grade Raiders here in Glenview, Illinois, put in a play this fall called Lion, which was stolen from Amon-Ra St. Brown, throwing a pass back to Jared Goff for a touchdown earlier in the season. We called it early in the game, and the guy who took the Amon-Ra handoff forgot to throw the ball back to the quarterback. It didn't work. Details matter. So, but to your point, there's always places where you can pull plays from and steal and borrow and have fun with it.
Coach Dan, that was that was on you, Coach Dan, I think, right? Maybe
no, for sure. I didn't teach it well enough. 100%. You got to take ownership of that and own that. The one piece of chatter that you hear in league circles about Ben Johnson, obviously with any first time head coach who's never done it before, there's going to be a guessing game on how he's going to command an entire team. Can he have the presence in the locker room? Can he be that forward facing guy for, 4 or 5 days a week during the season and be able to handle all those responsibilities? What's your hunch with Ben in terms of how he's equipped to handle that?
Yeah, look, the coaches that I've been around I've seen, be successful and not successful for that matter. I think it comes down to, being honest with people, being upfront and accountable for things that happen, helping players reach their potential. I think Ben checks all those boxes, and especially learning under Dan, I think he will. He's never obviously been in front of a whole team, to handle the day-to-day, but the way he conducts himself at press conferences, the way he handles himself with us, the media, that would give me confidence as a fan of another team if he was going to be my coach. I mean, again, he's accountable about things. He's, open to the point you'd expect him to be, right? He's not going to tell you everything, but he doesn't act like it's, these are state secrets and he can't, tell you the name of a play called Stumble Bum because, what's the point of holding that back? So, I think Ben has what it takes to be a head coach, and he'll be different than Dan. He's not the same, fiery type personality but what I've learned from covering Campbell these last few years is, if you're authentic, if you are who you are, look at Mike McDaniel in Miami, right? Like if you are who you are, players will respect that. And I think Ben will be himself and has learned enough these last few years under Dan to see what works.
The other question mark with Ben, and you can maybe speak to this with more expertise, is that I think maybe by his own admission that sometimes he is so detail oriented that, those types of people, perfectionist people, can want to be controlling and
right.
lose sight of how to delegate, how to let their assistants and their players have a little bit of freedom. Where is he on that growth scale? Because I think that's probably something that he's prioritized over the last couple of years. And obviously it's something that is a big deal in the head coaching role.
No, you're right. He said that, last year, I believe it was, where he talked a little bit about, having to let go of some things, and make sure that he wasn't, I don't know if it was just from a coaching standpoint or a personal standpoint too, when you spend 20 hours at a facility, you sort of neglect some things in your personal life, but learning that you can trust these people around you. And again, I think, a lot of, I mean, in any walk of life, it goes for us too, right? We're a part of who we've been around, or we pick up good things and bad things and things you want to emulate. And that's, that's Dan again. Like, look, Dan Campbell has a big say in what happens offensively, defensively too. He is the one, like any head coach, who gives them guidance and whose vision he charges his assistants with to make come to life. But he also, Dan said yesterday, that he very, very rarely overrules his assistants on anything when it comes to game planning or play calling. So he trusts those people, and I think Ben has learned that. The point, I guess, you never know until you actually get in it, but the point that he made when he was talking about that stumble bone play for the way that he's empowered some of those low-level assistants to be the ones that come up with some of those plays. I think that's an example of maybe that growth that he needed to show himself over the last couple of years before he was ready to take a head coaching job.
So you're an owner and a GM in another building exploring the possibility of Ben Johnson becoming your head coach. What would be your biggest reservation? What would be the one thing that you'd say, man, I'm just having a little bit of anxiety about this part of his resume?
I mean, I think he's a really good candidate. Look, I mean, staff, right? I mean, especially defensively, because that's a big thing. And if you're hiring a coach from the Lions who maybe is going to make a run to the Super Bowl, you got to make sure you have all those boxes checked. I don't know who his defensive coordinator is going to be. I don't know what his defensive staff would look like. A couple of years ago, when he was rumored to be in the Carolina mix, it's my understanding like Vic Fangio was the guy that he wanted as his defensive coordinator. Obviously Vic is a couple jobs removed from that now and doing well. So I don't know that would happen. Ben is still going to call plays. You certainly want to make sure that with an offensive play caller that they still have enough time to devote to the other, game management areas and how he would go about doing that. But, he's a bright enough guy that wouldn't be too big a concern for me. So internally, if he's bringing some people along with him to help keep him in check, maybe he has, a veteran assistant on staff, assistant head coach type role, senior defensive assistant, whatever it is that can help guide him through some of the hurdles that you sometimes encounter as a first year head coach. I think those things would be important. But in terms of the brains and ability to do the job, I wouldn't have any reservations.
So last question on Ben. The one thing that people in Chicago are worried about is that he can't bring the Lions offensive line with him on the plane if he takes a job here. So what would you say in terms of a guy that would have to make a grand adjustment to come in and start running an offense that clearly has had offensive line issues for the last 3, 4, 5, 50 years?
Well, hopefully the GM, whoever it is, if it's Ryan Poles or, someone that Ben wants or, whatever the case may be, if it's someone else, hopefully they value that, because look, this is it's a simple truth in the NFL. Even the Lions of old, when they were having no success, like they drafted Taylor Decker and they drafted Gazzer Cherilus and they Frank Ragnow, all these first round pick linemen, Dominic Raiola, Jeff Backus, Matt Millen, maybe the worst GM in NFL history. His first 2 draft picks as Lions GM were offensive linemen. So everyone is trying to do it. I think you got to have a good offensive line. And, really, again, for the offense to work here in Detroit, that's where it starts. So there's no look, if you don't have the players, right? If you don't have the Jimmys and the Joes, the X's and the O's aren't going to work. That's not going to change for Ben. But I do think Ben understands his personnel strengths and weaknesses as well as anyone, and can develop and design schemes maybe to accentuate the positives and overcome some of the negatives.
Let's flip sides of the ball for a couple minutes and talk about Aaron Glenn. Obviously, that side of the ball doesn't have the same statistical production this year that jumps off the page at you. But as we talked about earlier, the ability to adjust and adapt to all these injuries and still be successful and still be able to hold it together, and not just hold it together, but play winning football for a long time, has to be a reflection on Aaron Glenn's leadership and his ability to adjust. What would you tell folks about what he's done within this season to keep this thing humming?
Yeah, look, you're right. Obviously, when you look at the numbers, maybe they're not quite, what you would, certainly not, what the offense has done, but they started off really good. They finished really good. The most important thing to know about Aaron Glenn is, he comes from that same Dan Campbell type leadership school where former player, played, a decade and a half of really high level football in the NFL, has the respect of the defense. Alex Anzalone said it the other day that Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn are on par for him as the two best leaders he's ever been around. And so I think the way he treats players, the the honesty he has with them, the belief that he has in them, and sort of giving them the understanding of maybe why they're doing what they do when they try to accomplish things. I think that's his biggest strength. Like, he is going to be a leader, and he's going to put some people around him that help further the cause. He's not going to come with the reputation of Ben Johnson as being a genius X and O type guy, but he's aggressive, just like this whole Lions regime. You look at the blitz rates, you look at the things he likes to do. I think you'd see him play the same way as the Lions play in terms of their aggressiveness in some of the core concepts of football.
There's been cries from the Bears locker room for heightened accountability. And what I've interpreted that as, you can't just set standards. There has to be consequences for not meeting standards. It sounds like to me from hearing chatter around the league that Aaron Glenn, his background as a player informs the way he leads, and his just ability to get results in a manner that is very forward and direct is notable. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of that.
No, I mean, again, you look at where he came from, right? He played for Bill Parcells. You know what I mean? Like, Bill Belichick is somebody I believe that he's, had conversations with in the past about some of this stuff. He's the lineage that he has as a coach would speak to that. And he's very respected. Look, when you go back to 2021 here again, right? Dan Campbell has. This is a big credit to Dan. He has no problem firing friends. Like, Anthony Lynn was one of his really good friends that he brought in to be offensive coordinator. Well, midway through that season, it wasn't working. He decided to move on, empowered Ben as the pass game coordinator. We all know what happened there. The defense, there were a lot of questions about how the defense was going to be the first couple of years too, but Dan has never wavered in his belief about Aaron Glenn as being an excellent head coaching candidate in defensive mind. And they've made some changes on the staff, and finally this year I think they went and got Aaron some of the type players that he really needed, especially at the cornerback position. That's the one thing, if he comes to Chicago, is he likes to play man-to-man. He likes to get after you. He's going to need some cornerbacks that are willing to do that and that have that short memory that you talk about with that position. And if they bring some of that feistiness, that's what you're going to see from an Aaron Glenn type team.
Couple last things for you. Obviously, any defensive-minded coach that comes into Chicago is going to have to present a vision for the quarterback. Any insight at all, any sense of how Aaron would be able to assemble both a staff and a vision for, obviously, Caleb Williams, who's the most important piece in the Bears puzzle right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I have not talked to Aaron about, sort of staffing issues or what he would how he would envision, running that sort of thing. I think he would be more of an overseer, though, where Ben would be very hands-on. I don't know that Aaron would feel the need to call defensive plays, but maybe more like Dan set the philosophy on both sides of the ball. And, he's talked before about, maybe this was a leading question on our part, but, trying to figure out some of that stuff. But earlier this year, we were talking to him about sort of the running game and, why it's important for him. He always talks about stopping the run like a lot of defensive coaches do. And I do think he sort of subscribes to that theory too, that like offensively, you need to have that strong running game to give the quarterback, make life easier on the quarterback. And so I think he would take a similar approach, or want to coach a team that is built similarly to the Lions, with a strong offensive line, strong running game, because I know in his mind that helps the quarterback accomplish his goals.
Phenomenal stuff. I'm going to get you out of here with two fun ones. The first one being beyond Stumblebum. Is there another fun play from the Ben Johnson playbook from this season that you would highlight and say, man, that was a moment. That's a signature moment. Bears fans should go find that on YouTube or X or wherever they find their highlights and dig into it.
Look, the two best to me, without a doubt, are the ones that involve Penei Sewell. The one, Penei passing, I think we all sort of saw that one coming, because he was, in practice for about 8 straight weeks there. He was, every Friday they do this thing, they call it fat and go, right? And Friday, started practice, they have their offensive linemen just run routes, and, just the receivers are on one side, just running these pat and go routes. And Penei Sewell would join in the quarterbacks and throw those at some point. So we all sort of knew that was coming, Penei Sewell throwing a pass. when they ran the hook and lateral to Penei Sewell, that was one where you're like, oh man, come on. Because we, again, same thing where like we've joked and we've asked before, like, put Penei Sewell in the backfield, right? Like that guy's a monster. He's like the best athlete in the NFL at 6'5", 340 pounds or whatever he is. But when they ran that in a game, you're like, wow, what, that was just a crazy. And I think that play was penalized, and the pass by Sewell was turned into a sack. So those plays didn't work, but these guys just had some fun with it. Those are the two best plays. I actually texted Ben. I had a play that Stumblebum reminded me of. Maybe I'll tell that to you later, Dan. So if you ever run it, it runs it there. Like you can, send me a text and
royalties
know where it came from. But yeah, I texted him the other week. I was like, yo, that play reminded me of this play I saw many, many years ago. And he was like, hey, I like where your head's at. So we'll keep that one on wraps for now. But his bank of plays is limitless. But look up the Penei Sewell ones if you haven't seen them.
The smile on your face leads me to the very last question, because you and I commiserated for years about what it was like to be covering these teams that were in constant flux, failing, never in the playoffs. Your year may extend deep into February. Locker cleanout day, maybe like February 14th or whatever the day may be.
Yeah.
Tell me, Dave, what's life like on the other side? This might be me trying to get free therapy through the podcast, but tell me what life's like on the other side covering a team like this.
I think we talked in the spring, maybe. Text talked. I don't know. You called me something. We were at a meet, whatever it was. And you said, hey, you may never have to cover a coaching search again. And, it kind of hit me where I was like, wow, like that's crazy. What if I don't? I hope you're in the same boat one of these days. But it's just wild because, Dan, I used to, years ago, like my first full season covering the Lions was 2008. So that was the winless season. Before that, I covered Michigan State when John L. Smith was there, and I covered Michigan for a year after when Rich Rodriguez was there. I used to joke with my wife, like, save some vacation time, for a bowl game. We never went to a bowl game, never when I was covering any of these teams. So, I thought maybe I was the jinx for a minute there, but no, it turns out that, you hire the right people, and they put the right people in place, and everything sort of falls in line. So it's definitely different to do this, and we'll see if they have a run in New Orleans, inside them. I remember talking to Ben Volen one time years ago. He was like, man, you work so hard at these Super Bowls. He's like, if your team's ever here, you won't have to work nearly as hard because there's 30 people from your paper that are here. So
yeah,
maybe we'll find out what that's like. But
it feels like every time I've seen you over the last 16 to 18 months, you've been like happy and energized. And it's like, I'm like, man, like I need to get some of that drug at some point.
That's because, that January of 2021 was the longest January of my life. It's COVID, everyone's sort of locked inside, because that's when they hired Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. They traded Matthew Stafford, Kelvin Johnson, the Hall of Fame stuff was going on. I was like coaching my daughter's basketball team in Toledo, Ohio at a tournament, and they trade Matthew Stafford, and it all, everything hits the fan. I got to.
And you wrote that story from a parking lot, right? Like
I wrote that story from. You got stuff filed, right? Everybody has stuff filed ahead of times, but you're making calls, and I had to sit out like the championship game that we were playing in because I'm sitting in my car working. So knowing that you don't have those moments, there's always news to chase, there's always stories to write, but knowing that. You've avoided that. You've traded that for maybe the busyness of getting ready and planning for some Super Bowl type stories. It's much better on your personal life and your family life.
Well, my nadir was Thanksgiving night, Fairfield Inn in Taylor, Michigan, trying to process everything that I had just witnessed that day at Ford Field, and then taking dozens of calls and texts from people. Assuming that what was going to happen the next day was going to happen. And you're just like, man, this is really something. And so here we are now trying to find answers, and maybe the Bears will find them in the guys that you just sort of endorsed, or at least gave a thumbnail to in this podcast. So thanks for providing all that insight.
You got it, man. And hopefully this is your last coaching search.
I'm not counting on that at all. That's Dave Birkett of the Detroit Free Press. I'm Dan Wiederer, the Chicago Tribune. Thank you, as always, for listening to Take the North. Remember to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the pod. We will be back with you very soon with more on the Chicago Bears coaching search. I'm Dan Wiederer. That's Dave Birkett. Great talk. See you out there.